Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris. Each week, I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to talk film, something we really love to do a lot on this show. And things are kind of ramping up for us with, the Oscars coming, our own award show coming. There's a lot going on. But before we get into all that craziness, we're going to have an opportunity on this week's show to talk not one, but two movies. We'll be reviewing both Underwater and Weathering with You. So if you saw either movie, or you're interested in either movie, or on the fence about either movie, definitely would love to have you be part of the discussion. Please say hi in the live chat for those of you who are jumping on with us. But before we get into any and all of that, let me introduce you to my wonderful co-hosts, Jim Pugliafico, who's just returned from a business trip. Babe, I haven't seen you in a few days, except for like an hour after you got home. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back. I'm glad we're doing the show again after a short break. And the theme of this week seems to be water. I mean, it rained the whole trip that I was down there in Arkansas. And, we got two very wet movies to talk about. And so it's going to be good. Hopefully, we'll get a little sunshine girl action going after this. We'll see.
Jim, you don't know this yet, but I have rigged some secret sprinklers in the ceiling above your computer, and we'll trigger them at a random point through the show. So just be sure to cover your computer, okay?
Yeah.
If we hear electrical pops and screaming, we know it worked.
Oh, goodness,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, goodness. Will Lindis is here with us as well. Will, it's been a hot minute. We took a break last week because you were out of town. How you doing? Welcome back.
Yeah, really good. Good to be back, of course. Just sort of like Jim, it's one of those things where you have to go away for work sometimes. It's an unavoidable part of being an adult and trying to focus on the career. But while you're doing so, you miss these types of things because throughout the week, this is my release, right? This is the thing that we do every week where we come in here and we agree or argue about movies depending on how we're feeling that week. And even missing it for 1 week because of those obligations just feels like a little part of my heart was missing. Aww. So I'm glad we're back at it this week.
Well, glad we could restore that piece of your heart, like finding a little heart in the grass that you cut down in Zelda. It's definitely good to be back in the saddle with you guys. And looks like we've got some folks joining us in the live chat. Hamstract says, howdy, y'all. Hey, Hammy. Good to see you. Welcome. And Kevin Ryan is with us. Hey, Kevin. Glad to have you here as well. Guys, word on the street is Kevin got an awesome new job. Congratulations, Kevin, on that.
Woo!
Very happy for you.
Nice.
Congratulations, Kevin. No, that's super exciting. We're incredibly happy for you.
Indeed.
Hey, also word on the street is, and by word on the street, I mean word at the very beginning of the show by Brad, is that we have an awards show coming up very soon, right?
What?
Yes.
Well,
MBP awards, baby.
Well, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that show and how that's going to work.
Absolutely. So this is our MBP awards, and this sort of spawned out of the idea of, look, there's a lot of award shows out there that give out statues, and we think they're perfectly fine for what they are. Good job, Oscars. Congratulations, Golden Globes. But where the real power broking happens is behind the scenes at the MBP Awards each year. It's my favorite show of the year because it and our top 10 show, because it's just another one of those celebrations shows. It's a spot where we're going to have 10 different categories. Things like the best surprise performance, the movie most likely to get a rewatch, the worst movie, the best soundtrack or score, your favorite documentary. We have a bunch of awards that are not exactly...
Well, I'm sorry, but you left off the best category.
Save the best for last, though, right?
True.
The hottest on-screen moment, because we are only human, we are only flesh and blood, and this awards show is all about us looking at some of the categories that the other shows don't do, Everyone's doing best picture, everyone's doing best director, but we've got our own way of sort of looking at things. So here's what everyone that's our listeners can expect. This is actually going to be our 6th year doing this, guys. Starting back in 2015. We'll be doing this show next week, so it's coming up on our Tuesday. What is that? February 4th program, and we're going to go through all of our categories, but we also like to read off user listener submissions. So if you go to our Facebook page, there is going to be a link there right now for the MBP Awards 2020. If you can just click that link and answer 10 quick questions, it'll take you like 2 minutes to do. It won't take you much time at all. Then you'll be able to add to our show and give us a few more opinions for us to get out there, because we love sharing those opinions.
Yeah, because I mean, our our friends who listen to the show have a totally different view on movies than we would have, and they have their own favorite moments or performances or whatever. So I always love to hear those, because sometimes in thinking of these things at the end of the year, you think about all the great things you saw, and then somebody will mention something like, "Oh my God, I should have considered that," and it brings to mind a whole new, another whole thing to think about. So I can't wait to hear what people have to say.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what everyone, like all of our listeners, have to say. There's always some great input, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Like, I was looking sort of and kind of getting myself ready for this one. I was sort of looking over some of the previous picks from previous years, and man, there's some fun picks in there, especially honestly in the hottest on screen moment scene. Like last year, to give everyone sort of like a bit of a I don't know, to whet your appetite, both Brad and Jim chose the fruit pelting scene from The Favorite as their on screen moment.
Hot bear getting hit with a bunch of fruit while he was naked or in his underwear or something.
There's a fetish in there somewhere, maybe a couple of them. I don't know.
And I was, I've been kind of prepping my answers in advance, and I won't say who it is or what it was, but one of the people that filled out the survey already had the same hottest on screen moment as what I'm more than likely going to use, which means listener who will be revealed when we do that episode. You and I need to talk, because we're apparently on the same wavelength.
I can't wait to hear that one.
I'm right there with you, Will. The MBP Awards is one of my favorite shows that we do every single year. It's always so much fun, and half the fun for me is hearing what listeners pick. I mean, as much as I love hearing from, you and Jim, of course. I don't know. It's interesting to like cast that wide net and see what we bring in. So for those of you who'd like to participate, as Will mentioned, you can find that link on our Facebook page. Also, Jim, if you wouldn't mind including that in the show notes for anyone that's listening on digital tape delay, that would be a great way as well. Thanks for doing that, babe.
Yeah, will do.
And those listening live right now, I went ahead and cheated and tossed it in chat too. So several different ways you can get to it.
There you go.
Awesome.
Sounds good. Well, Will, thanks for doing that. And folks, we look forward to hearing your nominees for the MBP Awards. We've got 2 movies to talk about this week. Jim, Will, how are you feeling about diving right in? Because we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I think got a couple movies here we can kind of wet our whistle with.
Let's dive in.
Let's figure out which of these movies flooded our basements.
Let's go deep.
Oh,
bro.
Goodness. All right. All right. So we're going to talk about both Underwater and Weathering with You on this week's episode of the Movie Bears podcast. If you are brand new to the show and, not quite sure of our format yet, A, welcome. Glad to have you aboard. And B, we're going to talk about each movie spoiler-free for probably 10 or 15 minutes before we pull back that veil of spoilerness and do a deep dive review of the film. So we'll give you plenty of warning if you're listening live. Will let you know in the live chat when it's time to step away away for spoilers and come on back for the next film. If you're listening through the magic of digital tape delay on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, however you access your podcast content, it's going to be a few days from now, at which point Jim will have put a handy dandy time index in the show notes for you. So feel free to skip around as needed.
Maybe only a couple days.
Maybe. It depends. We'll see. But in any event, we got a lot to talk about. So here we go. We're going to kick things off with our discussion of Underwater. Or is that Underwater? That's my first attempt at talking to water, which you can't really do. So anyway, Underwater. Here we go. All right, Jim, if you wouldn't mind giving us some brief, spoiler-free, of course, setup exposition about this film. And what did you think? Is this worth seeing in theaters, waiting for rental, or maybe even skipping from your opinion? What did you think?
Yeah, so Underwater is the new film by director William Eubank, who gave us a film called The Signal a little while, a few years ago. I did not see that one, but I did hear about it. It was back in God, I forget, like 2014 maybe. I don't remember.
I think it was around 14.
Yeah, 2014, The Signal. It was a sci-fi movie. And this is a kind of a science fiction movie, too. Really an underwater thriller. And the synopsis goes like this. A crew of aquatic researchers work to get to safety after an earthquake or some phenomenon devastates their deep sea laboratory / drilling installation. But the crew has more than the ocean seabed to fear. So this one stars Kristen Stewart stars here as kind of an action star. You have Kristen Stewart, action star. We've seen her in lots of different kind of movies, usually drama. We saw her. She was also in the new what was it? Was it Charlie's Angels?
Yes.
In the
Which
new
I
didn't
see that either.
Which I did not see either. And none of us saw that, but she's in that. Well, I'm surprised you didn't see K-Stu in the Charlie's Angels.
Yeah, yeah.
I know, but yeah, this one, boy, I didn't really know what to expect going into this one, and I ended up really digging it. It was a lot of fun for basically kind of an undersea thriller. I don't want to give away too much here. There is kind of big spoilers in the plot of this movie. But one thing I really loved about it, it did remind me a lot of movies like Alien. It kind of followed the same kind of storyline with you have this badass female crew member who kind of takes charge of the situation, and she's in a survival mode. And one thing I liked about this movie, other than, as opposed to something like Alien, this thing started out like right off the bat. Like in the first, I think it was like in the first 2 or 3 minutes, like shit started going down, and it was kind of a roller coaster ride the whole way through. Lots of tension. The whole thing takes place in this deep sea installation sometime in the near future, I guess, where they've built these containers or underwater spaces that can withstand the tremendous pressures of the ocean, the water pressure, and just stuff starts going on. It's like an earthquake, and I won't give anything away, but I did really dig Kristen Stewart in here. I thought she did really, really, really well, kind of in this very physical role. It looked like there was a lot of action in this movie, a lot of crawling around through rubble, in and out of the ocean. And the whole movie is about survival basically in this disaster. But I really liked it. I would recommend. I don't know if this movie is going to be tough to find now because it's kind of been like 2 or 3 weeks, right, since we saw this. So, and I think we saw it like a week or so after it came out. So, look for this one if you want to. It's a great little Friday or Saturday night. Like, let's go and see a fun kind of action thriller, terror kind of movie. I would recommend seeing it. I think it's worth seeing.
Sounds like a recommend from Jim. And yeah, definitely a good point. It has been a little bit since Underwater came out, although I just did a quick search and a bunch of the theaters here in town still have it. So
Still have it. Great.
yeah. So
Yeah.
hopefully,
It's hanging in there.
if you dig the idea of this movie and you haven't seen it yet, it sounds like you still have an opportunity maybe. Will, how about for you? Did this resonate like it did for Jim? Did you go in a different direction? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think you guys know by now that I'm probably like the president of the K-Stu fan club. Not seeing Charlie's Angels, notwithstanding.
Yeah, we're gonna take you down a star for that.
Yeah. So already going into this, I was interested, but honestly with like sort of muted expectations because I think the trailers underwhelmed me. So I knew going into this one, like, I'm going to watch it. I like enough of the elements here, but it might be a struggle watch. And I ended up like legitimately enjoying this one as a good example of like, in a good way, this isn't an insult, but like a B horror sci-fi style film, you know? I think that there is absolutely a space in filmdom for this type of movie. And especially coming right off of like all the prestige films and stuff from December, this was a very welcome film. The things that I quite liked about it were first of all, Kristen Stewart's really good in this, but I won't go too far into that. Just praise. This movie starts off with action. Like I think that from the very beginning of this movie, it kind of inserts you into this moment. You don't have like some of these movies will take like 20 or 30 minutes, like having the characters like hang out at the cabana and get to know each other before they then go on their first mission, and then shit goes wrong and you've already wasted a third of your movie on setup. And this movie just says, you know what? Let's just drop you in and see what happens. There's a very interesting tone and atmosphere to this movie, like a texture, like everything feels dark and oppressive and wet, which it should, because you are super far under water, hence the name of this movie. And so it's everything about the production design and just sort of the way this thing was shot matched the way the characters were feeling, which made me feel like I was there with them. It's not a perfect movie. I think that some of the action sequences absolutely slap. Some of them didn't work as well for me because they felt a little too fantastical, even for what they were doing. Any movie that has T.J. Miller in it automatically gets a star taken off of it because fuck that guy. Because of my bias, because of the things that he's done. So for me, it's just one of those movies that I think was, when I was star rating this one, this is like a 3.5 star movie, which is, right in that, ground rule double if you're doing baseball analogies. This is the type of movie that I don't think is going to set your world on fire. I'm not going to remember this movie at the end of the year in terms of end of year lists. I'm not going to remember this movie in the middle of the year when we do mid-year lists, but for something to do on a Tuesday or Wednesday night, just like, I guess I'll go check out a movie. This was very serviceable, very enjoyable, and it made me feel what it was supposed to feel. So I liked it.
2 likes.
Wow. 2 likes.
Yeah. Well, I Brad, I don't want to interrupt the flow too much, but Will, I want to circle back around after to talk about kind of the atmosphere of this film. And, how that was set up through the use of, the setting. So go ahead, Brad.
Thank you for letting me share my opinion, Jim. I appreciate that.
Oh, geez. Sure.
I like this movie too. I wouldn't say that I loved this movie, but this is definitely one that I would recommend you see in theaters while you can. Again, if you're looking for something to see, we're kind of in this no man's land right now where like not a lot of great things are coming out. So, if you have the hankering to go to the movies, this could be a solid pick, as long as you go in expecting sort of a B-rate horror / suspense movie. I gotta be honest with you guys, going into this movie, I was not looking forward to it. And Will, I know you're the president of the K-Stu fan club. I don't know if there's an anti-fan club, but I guess I'd be the president of that, because I know. I'm not a fan of her. I think she's completely wooden, and she plays the same character in everything. She has like one facial expression. But I really enjoyed her in this, and it really surprised me. And I saw her do some different things I hadn't seen her do before. So maybe I need to go back and watch some of her more recent outings that I haven't caught up with. So
maybe the president of the K-Stu fan club could recommend some things that are more that might broaden your exposure to her.
Maybe, but recommendation.
I'm drafting
one recommendation only. It better be a good one, president of the K-Stu fan club. You get one shot.
I got you, fam.
But this was a fun, romp under the sea.
I was singing that song after the movie for some reason, which was weird. Was very weird.
But some other cast standouts for me: John Gallagher Jr. I freaking love that guy. He plays so many different things. He was the killer in Hush, which we saw at South by a few years back. The home invasion movie about a deaf woman and a guy like wears a scary mask and breaks in. That was John Gallagher Jr., who's like America's sweetheart, man. So it's a little weird to see him play a serial killer. But it was nice to see him show up in this movie as like a good, wholesome guy. Wasn't so wild about TJ Miller. I guess I'm still like in the camp of I don't want to see him in anything else at the moment. I don't know if I was ready for him to make his big comeback in this film. I think the last thing I saw him in was, what was that movie a couple years ago? Office Christmas Party or something?
I think that's exactly what it was called.
Yeah.
Like the movie that was like perfectly titled for search engine optimization.
Right?
Yeah, here's the thing. I was expecting... Oh, go ahead. I was kind of hoping for something different from TJ Miller here, and we didn't get that.
All we got was TJ Miller being TJ Miller. And you know what? Sometimes movies like this need a kind of character like this. I think maybe I would have brought like John McBride in instead, but maybe he wasn't available. Maybe he was doing other things. Also, maybe I'm not a Hollywood director, so take that.
Or cast,
or casting director. Take that for what you will, right? But I think everybody, given the material that they had, and some of it is not great, I will just say that. I think everybody did well with what they had to do here for the most part. I do think this movie suffers a little bit with some believability in some of the plot points. They're like 8,000 feet below the surface of the ocean or something, or several miles, where like... we do not have the technology possible, even
26,000.
26,000. There you go. We can't even send submarines deep, but like they're walking around in like, pressure suits outside in the water that deep. It's in the trailer, so I'm not spoiling anything. But I'm just kind of like, no, that doesn't work. No, that doesn't work. And this movie doesn't set itself up to be like a far in the future sci-fi movie. If it did, like that would be different, but they're using like fucking modern day technology. So I don't know. For a sci-fi geek like me, that kind of pulled me out quite a bit. But as a B movie, as a suspense film, I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to getting into spoilers because there's some cool things to talk about with this film. But Jim, did you want to talk a little bit about the atmospheric piece before we kind of move on?
Yeah, the fact that this takes place in, again, the equivalent to this movie is something like that takes place in outer space. They can't just escape, go outside of the thing that they're stuck in and start running and get help, right? They're isolated. They're in a extremely dangerous environment, and we'll get into some of that science stuff probably a little bit. But I think that definitely helped with the atmosphere and what Will calls, kind of the texture of this movie. This movie goes from being like, it has different feels. Like you have your science, you have your kind of adventure movie, you have your environmental disaster movie in here, And then you have another kind of movie, which I don't want to get into until we get into spoilers, as you know, as far as what's really going on here. And I liked how it handled all that stuff. But yeah, I have a lot to talk about in spoilers, so let's move on to that. I think this movie is fine. If you want to go out and see it in a movie theater, I think it's worth seeing on a Friday, Saturday night. If you have to wait till it's on VOD, and it will be on VOD probably pretty quickly, I think this is another one you could sit down at home and watch. I would recommend watching it at night, you know, turn down the lights to kind of get that atmosphere. But I think that would help.
One thing that I think will make you guys feel a little bit better is I know that the idea of like this being TJ Miller's comeback was floated, but this movie was actually shot back in 2017 and kind of sat shelved for a bit, and that was around the same time that TJ Miller's like all the sexual assault stuff came out with him, and that's part of why this one got shelved for so long, because they couldn't just like remove the actor from it, but they didn't want to put something out that had him while everything was still there. So that's kind of why this one got January dumped and why it got dumped so much later. So if you're not wanting any more TJ Miller on your screens, don't worry, this is not going to like harken his return, I hope.
Fingers crossed.
No, because if it was going to be his return, you'd think that they'd want to show maybe a different facet of his capabilities if he has them. You know what I mean? Other than the same old TJ Miller shtick that I think we kind of got in this movie. It might have been slightly toned down. Instead of 100% TJ Miller, it might have been 85%, but it was still there.
Indeed. All right. Well, sounds like we are ready to talk spoilers, so we're going to go ahead and make that transition. If you have not yet seen Underwater and you value your virginal innocence where its plot is concerned, feel free to step away for about 15 minutes, then come on back for our Weathering with You discussion. And Will, thanks so much for putting a notice in the chat for our live listeners. Spoilers are officially fair game. Where do you guys want to start?
The element that I thought was most exciting for me about this, that was, I think, kind of hinted at, I suppose, in the trailers, but you didn't quite fully understand, was what the scope of the threat they were dealing with was.
Right.
You knew that they were underwater. You knew that there was probably some sort of creature, but like you weren't sure. You didn't know. And here we got a movie that, you know, you guys, hit the nail on the head in saying that there's like a space analogy with sort of this. And with that, this giant undersea, incomprehensible like creature that has all of these little minions that are the ones that are actually doing the attacking. It almost reminded me of something very Lovecraftian or very much out of like a Cthulhu style story.
Oh yeah, I've been calling it Kaijulu.
Yeah. I'm glad. So we're on the same wavelength there. And I love that because I am a person who I resonate with, I have to be careful about how you say I resonate with like Lovecraftian ideals because dude was a super big racist. But I love like the way that he did like monsters and sort of the unknowable thing at the edges of like our sanity, right? Like I think that's a really cool element to explore. And unfortunately with film, there's not a lot that really like hits it super well. Maybe the closest is aside from like Reanimator would be Color Out of Space, the movie that just now came out that's about Cthulhu stuff. But this felt like it's sort of like Cthulhu light, and I appreciated that. I got to like, it scratched the itch.
Yeah, that's what I was hinting at earlier. Like it turned into a monster movie at one, or overlaid a monster movie on top of the kind of thriller, escape survival movie that it already was. And at one point, the monster, there's multiple little monsters as well. There's babies, there's like adult sized monsters, and then there's the big monster that kind of was reminiscent of either the Aquaman. Wasn't there a big like Aquaman monster in that movie?
Yes.
In the ocean. I forget. Right.
Yeah.
And with somebody's voice. Did it have somebody's voice? I forget.
Kate Blanchett?
And then
No.
or something like that. Yeah.
Maybe. Anyway.
Wait, in
And
which one?
Aquaman.
In Aquaman?
Was it
Oh, was
Aquaman?
it Julie Andrews? Because
Oh,
it came
that's
out
It
what
the
it
was
was.
same
Julie
Julie.
weekend
Andrews.
as
Yes, it
Mary
was.
Poppins.
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was almost like almost reminiscent of the same monster, but certainly much more. It seemed more scary and less fantastical, I guess, than in Aquaman. But I thought that was pretty effective, and because you couldn't see it, it's dark. It kind of heightened the horror element of this movie. But and then it got me because Brad, you were talking about the science, the wonky sciencey aspects of this, and walking around in suits at 26,000 feet, the deepest point in the ocean. That just isn't done. I mean, that's not done. There's only a few people that have ever even been to those depths, and they're done in very specialized deep sea submersible vessels that are, and you're just not going to put like a drilling rig down there at the bottom of that ocean. It'll absolutely be crushed to pieces, and that's what kind of kept taking me out. And I'm like, why did they have to do this? Why did they have to set this up at such a like the deepest point in the ocean? And I think they had to do it because the monster. Otherwise, people would say, "Oh, the monster. Why didn't people never see the monster before?" Right? And that's because nobody really goes down to those depths very much. So yeah, that was just a little weird. But still, like I said, it was very enjoyable for what it was. This is a kind of movie that could be really terrible, really, really terrible, right? We've seen how 47 meters down uncaged went, right? We saw how terrible that went. The writing here I thought was much, much sharper than that, much more entertaining. And if, as far as undersea thrillers goes, this is pretty, pretty, pretty far up there, I think, at least for recent undersea thrillers.
Yeah, you mentioned something, Jim. I don't know, just sort of thinking about like we don't see a lot of movies that go to like the depths where this one went, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
the deepest part of the ocean, the furthest reaches of space, whatever it happens to be. And I think that part of that is that you put something there because you sort of make it like a cautionary tale, and it's not, the movie is not a cautionary tale, don't get me wrong, but I think that that's one of those like classic like storytelling things about like the person going to the place that no one has ever been before. Well, when you do that, you also have to face things that no one has ever seen before, and it's not just things like this, although I mean, again, space exploration and deep sea make the most sense, but even something like The Witch, which had to deal with like dealing with similar things when you were at the edge of society, so far removed from everyone, the edge of the woods, the edge of the darkness, you don't know what's beyond there. I think there's something to it, and it's part of why like there's times when I'm in the ocean and I'm just like, oh man, I'm swimming with the fishes and I'm enjoying life, and then I just think like I'm in the same body of water right now as creatures that people
Jaws.
have, well, it's sharks obviously, but like creatures that haven't been discovered yet. And I'm not necessarily talking about Cthulhu monster type things or whatever, but there's so much of the ocean that hasn't been explored, and when you're floating above it, you just think, man, that is right below me, and I don't know what's right below me, and that can be like on a kind of a cosmic level, the Lovecraftian thing, kind of terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Will, you talked about it being maybe not really a full on cautionary tale, but I think there were elements of that came across to me in terms of like, here's a big corporation, they're drilling a hole in the bottom of the ocean, and then they kind of awoken this unknown thing that's just basically, this is kind of like nature, like biting back. You know what I mean? It did have that a little bit of that element. Never got preachy or anything like that, but I think for me at least, that subtext was
and
there.
then what was interesting to me is like, at the end of the movie, after this whole ordeal happens, K-Stu sacrifices her life to save those two people.
In her
in her
underwear.
underwear. We get a bunch of newspaper, clippings and stuff showing that the corporation like sweeps it under the rug and they start drilling again, and ultimately it seems like nothing has changed. So if we get Underwater 2 more underwaterer, it'll be interesting to see how much more escalated things can become. But I mean, as cautionary tales go, uh, I almost think this is like an allegory for like people just never fucking learn.
Yep. Yep. Similar to most kaiju movies, right? I mean, you know, just like drilling holes in the ocean, going into space, pollution. We've seen movies about pollution monsters. So, yeah, this definitely had that element.
Yeah, and the creature design was cool. I think that's important for me as a fan of like creature features, horror films, that sort of thing. Like monster got to look cool, and I very much liked the giant gaping maw of this thing is terrifying. But then all of the little ones, which each one of the little ones was like absolutely like lethal by itself, and you see that there's just like hundreds upon hundreds of these things just
Hanging out.
like just hanging out on the big one. And I think there's something about like that. I think Cloverfield did something similar, that is always so like terrifying, just thinking that like, wow, if the little ones were could kick my ass, and now there's like a giant version of that, man, I'm fucked.
Yeah, you mentioned Cloverfield. I mean, the tie-in to that movie, of course, is 10 Cloverfield Lane, which was John Gallagher Jr.
Yep.
Right? He was in that movie. Except I wish they had done more with his character here. I don't know, man. He was like unconscious for 2/3 of the movie, I think. Right?
He was literally dragged through this movie.
Yeah, that was a little bit disappointing. But I don't know what are you going to do with that. I mean, and like I said, with T.J. Miller's character, he has to be or had to be the quippy guy, who I just didn't feel anything. I didn't feel much for many of the deaths in this movie. That was another thing, and I think that might be a symptom of them not setting up the characters as well as they could. I think that's the double-edged sword, though, right? I praise the movie for jumping in, like right after she brushed her teeth at the beginning. Shit started going down. We didn't get any time with the characters to kind of empathize with them. Mm-hmm. They were like thrown into it, and you're like, okay, you're on this ride with them, and then things start happening, and but the flip side of that is you don't have the buy-in for the characters, right. So you're a little bit emotionally detached.
And then
I guess,
to try and account for that, you've got to try and inject some character moments along the way, right? And when you're facing deep sea apocalypse, whatever, some of those moments don't necessarily make sense that they're happening. Like at one point, T.J. Miller. It was T.J. Miller, whatever. He finds a moon pie and it's like, "Hey, John Gallagher Jr., your girlfriend loves moon pies. Why don't you give this to her?" When they're in the middle of like running for their life from these fucking deep sea creatures trying to kill them. Like, kudos for a cool, hey bro, give this to your girlfriend character moment. But like, it made no sense that these characters would stop and have this conversation, So I think it kind of hurts it there.
Well, and I think there's ways to even do that. Like, I think about a film that handled that one specific element, and a lot of other elements better too, but that one specific element better, and that's 1917, which is another film that started you pretty much right in the action. Like, the action starts on like minute 2 of that film, right? Is when things kick off. And it keeps going, but there are moments where there's like those little slow beats where the characters have chances to talk to each other. And I think that the difference is not necessarily in like not having the setup or having the setup. It's what you do with your moments of downtime. And this movie gave fortunately didn't drown us in TJ Miller quips, but one was too many and we got more than one. We got a lot of like kind of that quippy humor there, and we didn't get enough just like the characters relating to one another. I think that would have made all the difference in terms of like us feeling those deaths.
Yeah, absolutely. And even you mentioned 1917, which is, I think, a really good movie. I also felt in that movie that I was a little bit emotionally detached from those characters, even though they did try to incorporate those moments to deepen the characters. They weren't deep enough to really grab me. Did I care? Yeah, I cared, and I but I just didn't feel the gravity of some of those situations. So, yeah, and like I said, we said that this wasn't a perfect movie, and it's not. But I think it's fun entertainment. It's a good time. It's got enough. Man, that first attack, that first structural issue, with at the very beginning with Kay Stu brushing her teeth, like that actually scared the shit. It's one of the best jump scares of the film, which when the structure starts to collapse on her. I thought that was, that got me. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, definitely impactful the way that initial collapse happened, and then it was even cool to see it like further compounding, right, as time went on. Like different sections were getting blocked off,
Yeah.
and it started to, like, we could see it like pancake under the water. They did some really cool things with physics on structures. I don't know why physics don't work on underwater suits in this movie, but at least we got a little bit of structural integrity compromisation going on there. So
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. Very cool.
Indeed. Well, guys, we have a whole nother movie to talk about. Any final thoughts on Underwater before we make that transition?
Yeah, I'm kind of excited that this movie is still out in theaters. I mean, this is week 3 for this movie, and this is a time when screenings, like the amount of like theater space that you have is kind of limited, because you still have all of those movies that were like the prestige films from December that are getting their slow rollouts as well. You get the other stuff that gets dumped in January. You start to see things like like check out all of the Oscar live action shorts and stuff like that getting the occasional screening here as well. So the fact that this one's held on for 3 weeks is, it's not making like crazy money or whatever, but the fact that it's still out there is nice for, again, one of these like soft little B horror movies. So I'm glad this exists, and I'm glad that people listening to this might have a chance to go check it out.
Absolutely.
So, guys, just to put a capstone on this, if we do get Underwater 2, Wetty Wetty Boogaloo, would you want to see it?
I would say it.
Maybe, yeah.
I would say it. If Kristen Will's in, if Kristen Stewart is in, right?
But she can't be, like, right? Like they'd have to pull some like real fuckery to put her in it.
That's true. We are in spoilers, but
yeah,
she can't be in it.
Like, yeah, I honestly, I like this one as a one and done. Would I go see it if they made it? Yeah, absolutely. I like watching movies, and I had a good enough time with this one. But I kind of prefer this one to just sort of be its own thing.
I could see that. Yeah, sometimes a self-contained adventure is the best kind. Hey, we've got a couple new listeners with us. Firo Brando is in the live chat. Hey, Firo, welcome. Glad to see you. And Jake Carson. Hey, Jake. Good to see you, too.
Hey, guys.
He says, hey, fellas.
Or fellas.
He says, first time listening live. Haven't had a chance to see Underwater yet, but Kristen Stewart was fun in the reboot of Charlie's Angels. Seems more comfy in her own skin these days. Jake, none of us have seen Charlie's Angels yet, but Will is the president of the K-Stu fan club. So, Will, maybe
I'm handing out buttons.
Maybe your homework assignment is to catch up with Charlie's Angels at some point and see if that belongs in the pantheon of K-Stu goodness.
I absolutely will. In fact, it was one of those ones, like, I didn't skip it for like, fuck this movie, I don't want to watch it reasons. It unfortunately came out at that weird time when I was scrambling to watch so many other things that I had to cut something, and this was one of the ones that fell by the wayside. But I don't know if it's available for streaming yet. I don't think it is, but as soon as it is, I think that's going to be like a lazy afternoon movie.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if you're able to catch up to it at some point. Let us know your thoughts. Jake, thanks so much for letting us know your thoughts on Charlie's Angels. And guys, I think it's time. We're going to go ahead and make that transition over to our second movie of this week's discussion, Weathering with You. So grab your umbrellas, batten down the hatches, get ready. Here we go, our discussion of Weathering with You. All right. Well, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of a brief setup for this movie, some folks may not even be aware of its existence, sadly, and let us know. In your opinion, is this worth seeing in theaters waiting for rental or skipping it? What do you think?
Yeah, so director Makoto Shinkai is not necessarily a household name in the United States, but he is an absolute phenomenon in Japan. His previous movies, most notably the movie Your Name, which we reviewed here on the show and we're all very, very favorable towards, is actually the highest grossing anime of all time, like in terms of box office. That movie made... like 358 million box office. And, people didn't watch it in the States because it had like a very small run over here. But Japan, it just absolutely swept up. This guy is like the new Nicholas Sparks in terms of just like developing like a rabid fan base. And his newest movie, Weathering with You, is already number 6 in the all-time box office for an anime. And it's just begun its US rollout. This anime is a... sort of a fantasy drama romance about this high school boy. He runs away from home and he ends up in Tokyo. And he's like 16 years old and trying to figure out how to make his way, and he's not having a really good time of it. Partially compounded by the fact that Japan Tokyo is in the middle of this like 3-month long just rainstorm, just rain, no, unrelenting. It's hurting everybody's mood. It's affecting like people's like their ability to go out and do the things that you would normally do. Well, while he's there, he meets this girl, and he soon finds out that this girl may just have the ability to help bring a little bit more sunshine into both his life and the lives of everyone around him. And this movie is so freaking adorable, and I absolutely love it. It is a very high recommend for me. I'm going to lead with that in terms of the opinion stuff. I think that one of the things that director Shinkai does so well is he is able to find these really compatible like leads, these really compatible like characters in terms of chemistry. And I'm not just talking about like how they work romantically, although his movies do have a romantic edge to them, but just the push and pull between them as they have like both different wants, but also wants that sort of interact with one another. A lot of them tied to the weather, of course, because that's one of the big overarching elements of this film. I absolutely adored both of these characters, and what made them all the better is you have this really great supporting cast as well. Just really good supporting characters from his boss to her little brother. Just all these different characters that all kind of work their way into the story, and each one of them has like sort of like the onion effect of like as you spend more time with the character, you peel off some layers and you learn more about them, and it's so very welcome. The fantasy elements work very well too. This movie has its own mythology. We'll talk about what that mythology is in spoilers, but this movie has its own mythology, and it does a good job of always living up to that. It sets up like the rules of its world and lets you sort of play in that fantasy space without ever feeling that any of the stuff that happens is cheap or unwarranted. This movie is very good at setting up a lot of cause for any of the effect that comes later on. So I very much recommend it. I think that it's a delightful watch. I think I know how you two came down on this, but I'm very interested in hearing.
All right.
Jim, how about you then? Enlighten Will as to how you came down on Weathering with You.
Yeah, I really liked Weathering with You. I was really impressed. I am not what you say. I'm not a super aficionado of anime films, although I have seen, a handful of them, and those I've seen, I've mostly liked. This one's near the top of the list. I loved Your Name from Makoto Shinkai, as you remember when we reviewed that. I was blown away by that movie. It's a movie that I'd love to come back to at some point if I have time. So I was very jazzed to see this movie, Weathering with You. And I really liked it. I'm not sure it's up to the level of Your Name with me, but I can tell you that I was, and mostly because I'm not sure the story sticks the landing for me. I loved most of the story, but when it gets toward the end, and we'll talk about more in spoilers, but technically and artistically, what we see on the screen in terms of how this film is animated, I think it's astounding. Like some of the things that we see on the screen, and not just like, I mean, it's raining all the time, so there's water effects going on. That's all cool. But there's so much like with perspective that's going on in this movie, and things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with in what you might consider a traditionally animated film. I don't know exactly how this animation is done, how much computers are used, and how much is actually drawn. But I can say I was like astounded, but just like looking at the stuff on the screen, I'm going, wow, that looks amazing. And I did like the way the story was set up. This kid, he's kind of lost. He stumbles into a life in Tokyo and he's trying to make his way. And there's this like, pixie dream girl comes along, and she has some kind of special abilities. We'll just say that for now. And their relationship, I think I felt their relationship emotionally. I thought was really good. So yeah, I mean, I really really love this movie. We did see the subtitled version of it, right? Because I
Yeah.
kind of despise seeing dubbed movies, but yeah, I thought the voice acting was great. Just a lot of things to love about this movie. I just wish it stuck the landing a little bit better. But Brad, I think you're maybe along the same lines, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking similarly to you along the lines of being more a fan of subbing rather than dubbing. I'm really
I'm sure you are.
I'm really glad that we got to see this
Duh.
English subtitled. And it's interesting for me because I used to hate watching subtitled movies. But I think my brain has sort of picked up the ability to like soak up the language without actively reading it, since I've seen enough at this point. And hearing the just natural language spoken in the film, it's a beautiful language to me. So it's kind of like best of both worlds. I know we've talked a lot about the visuals, which are absolutely fantastic. This movie does incredible things with the texture of water, reflections in water. But I also want to talk about the sun. And Jim, you kind of mentioned the pixie dream girl has an ability. We'll get more into that in spoilers, but those few rare moments where the sun does come out, like bursting through the clouds, shining through the rain, were just fucking breathtaking.
Beautiful.
Yeah, when this movie comes out on Blu-ray or streaming or whatever, like I want to take some screen caps and like use those as backdrops for my computer and all that good stuff. I mean, it's just so beautiful. But I also want to take a moment to talk about the music of this film. We all know that the standard Brad Harris movie success litmus test trademark, is did I buy the soundtrack? And coming out of the movie, I sent Will a screen grab of the purchase in the Apple Music store. This movie has a fantastic score to it. I mean, I absolutely love the instrumentation. Also, typically, I'm not a fan of like pop songs used in things, especially if they're like drippy, sappy, lovey pop songs. Jim and I have this like private in-joke thing we joke about called Shitty Pop Song Time, SPS time. And so we looked at each other a couple times during this movie and we're like, it's JSPS time. But the further we got into the movie, the more the music just really fit for me. And it was absolutely beautiful. I picked up the soundtrack and been listening to it on repeat for like 2 days now. Jim, it's a good thing you've been on a business trip because you probably would be like sick and tired of the soundtrack at this point. I had it going through every smart speaker in the house earlier today, and that was kind of amazing as I was running around doing some things in preparation for your arrival.
You'll have to tell me what songs that you're most gravitating to.
Oh, yeah, totally. I have a few.
Like, yeah.
Okay. But, all inclusive, I think this film is absolutely fantastic. I agree. It's not quite the level of Your Name, but it comes pretty damn close for me. And, it's just so great to see phenomenal animation and deep character work like this. I mean, I cried in this movie probably 8 times, and that's a lot for me to cry in a film. There's a lot of stuff that's really connective to me. We'll talk about that in spoilers, but this is a pretty home run, I think. Even if you're not like a huge anime fan, you don't have to be. When you hear anime, people tend to think of like Dragon Ball Z, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of different types of anime. And so if you just like animated films in general, I think this one is a pretty solid choice.
Yeah, there's a lot less. Every film of a specific type is gonna adhere to some of the tropes of that genre, but this one doesn't seem as laden with some of the more obnoxious ones. Like this film has very little of what you would call like fan service, which is like the showing off of like hot girls for the sake of showing off hot girls that you get in anime sometimes. I do love that like Shinkai is. I think some directors have like the thing that's sort of their go-to, their signature piece, right? Like, when you think about Miyazaki with Studio Ghibli, he is fascinated with planes and anything that involves like aeronautical travel, and so a lot of his movies feature whether it be real world planes or classic planes or like cool like magic. Flying things, like he adheres to that very closely, and I think Shinkai is really showing that his trademark, his area of expertise, is the sky. Between both this and Your Name, there are so many just gorgeous shots that feature the sky. Like a lot of the shots, in a way that you don't see in a lot of other movies, feature the camera almost tilted upwards or zoomed back a little bit so that you have more of that sky above them, making the characters feel small beneath it. And it works especially well here because the thing that is literally pushing down on the characters at all time is this rain, this atmosphere, this like dark and dreary sky. And of course, it's there hovering over them in every frame of this movie.
Yeah, and Will, you're right. I mean, the atmosphere that's brought into this just by the fact of the weather, the rain in Tokyo, and when things start to pick up in terms of the girl in this movie, and there are sunshine effects, it feels so impactful, right? Because it's in contrast to what's been going on through most of the movie, kind of that gray atmosphere. But even that said, that Shinkai has made that grayness just so that can be just so stark and boring, but it's not here. It's done very beautifully. I also like the fact that he gravitates towards human stories, right? These are human stories. These are about people, not necessarily like superheroes or magical animals, or you know what I'm saying? Like this is a more grounded story, even though there are fantastical elements to it. And the same thing with Your Name. They seem to take kind of a back seat to the effect on the humans in the story and the emotions in the story. And I really like that with these movies especially, but in general in movies.
Completely agree. Well, gentlemen, I think we got a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack, to use corporate speak, in our spoiler section. Any final non-spoilery thoughts before we open that can of spoiler worms?
I'm disappointed that I don't get to. I've got other movie tickets this weekend, but it's there's a 4DX screening here in Austin,
I
which
heard about
includes
that.
like the seats move like you get with the rumble seat stuff, but also like it's going to have like rain and mist inside the theater, and I kind of regret that I'm watching something else instead in that slot because otherwise that sounds amazing.
So you could physically get wet while the characters are getting wet.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Like I think there's
Your
um,
basement could be literally flooded by this movie.
yikes.
Oh boy, oh boy. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and make the jump over to spoilers. If you have not yet seen Weathering with You and you don't want to be spoiled, we totally get it. In fact, this is such a great movie. I mean, I recommend, even if you're like, I don't care about spoilers. Well, maybe care at this point. I don't know. Up to you. Only you can make that decision. But we're going to go ahead and pull the band-aid off. Spoilers are indeed incoming. Jim, Will, it's time. Where do you want to begin?
Want to talk about the Sunshine
Let's
Girl?
do it.
Yeah, the 100% Sunshine Girl.
Yeah.
So we learn in the movie that she has the ability to kind of stop the rain and bring the sunshine. And I love the fact that they turn it into this business venture at one point in the movie, where they're basically selling her ability to people who are clamoring to do this because they have a wet outdoor wedding, or they a sporting event, and they want the sunshine, and she's able to bring it. And I really loved that whole concept of doing that. And then, like I said, toward the end, the plot with the police and the gun and the you know chasing her around, and uh, you'll have to kind of refresh me a little bit on some of the plot elements at the end, because I'm not sure they fully fell into place
So
for me.
before we get too far beyond your first thought, I wanted to circle back to that, Jim. You mentioned the business venture. I was a little like Stevie on that at first. I was like, really? Like they're gonna make money off of this thing that feels gross and slimy? But then they weren't just taking jobs for people who like wanted a sunny day for their wedding, or wanted to be able to play with their friends outside. They also took jobs for like an old granny who wanted to, honor the memory of her passed away husband by being able to be up by his grave during the day. They took a job where they made a sunny day so that a little girl with asthma could like come out and play with her dad and connect with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I just
Mm-hmm.
thought that was such a cool way to drive some neat character moments and kind of make me care about Hina's ability and her role as a quote weather maiden, without it being, Will, you mentioned that like with some animes you kind of get like the stereotypical anime, like the tear coming out of the eyeball, or like the goofy faces, or the whole job stuff was like an opportunity to have like a montage of that silly stuff. But I'm really glad that they didn't go that direction and made it more serious.
Absolutely. Like I think those types of things definitely have a place. Like I like a lot of different anime for very different reasons, but I think that it would not have fit at all what this story is trying to portray. It would be like the same as if I don't know, like you can have fun watching like the Jackass guys doing those types of things, but if they like whirl in on a shopping cart in the middle of the Notebook, it's going to feel super fucking out of place. And I think those types of anime tropes would have felt just as out of place with this story, which, despite its like kind of magical elements, you know, like this is a girl who can like go up into the clouds and make the sun, and there's like little like water snakes that sort of like swim, I'm sorry, water fish that kind of like swim and swirl around you. Aside from all of those fantasy elements, this is a very grounded story. And I think that it needed to be told as such.
Yeah, I think like, and that's what I liked about it. I like the grounded nature of it. I think the more fantastical these movies get, the less it kind of engages me. And I was totally on board with both of these two main characters, as well as even, you know, like a couple of the side characters. Mr. Suga, was that his name? And
Mr. Suga
and the cat, Rain.
Yes, the cat.
The cat was great.
Scene stealer right there.
Yeah.
So did you guys pick up on the two big cameos in this one?
No.
There were I had to look it up afterwards because I'm like, I'm 99% sure these are cameos, but then I was like, well, it's hard to tell with anime characters, right? Like, you know, how they're drawn. So Brad, you mentioned the grandmother who was doing the thing for the ceremony for her departed husband, and her grandson who was visiting there, and sort of takes a moment and sort of gives Huraka, they give him an idea as to like what type of gift he should get. Well, that was Taki, who was the main character of Your Name.
Really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the other side character of the other weird cameo was then he goes to the store and he buys the ring.
Yes.
And the girl at the counter is showing the ring. And that was Miyamizu, who was the other lead of Your Name.
Really? Huh.
And so it's just sort of like a kind of in-universe building for Shinkai. Like, it was one of those things, like the reason I wouldn't have picked up on it if not for like there were some girls who were sitting near me and they were like, oh my God. Like when he first came on screen, I'm like, okay, I think that's Your Name.
That's
guy.
somebody.
So, interesting. I mean, it's been a hot minute since I've seen Your Name, so I'm trying to cast my mind back a little bit. But this movie kind of went in an interesting direction, maybe comparatively with its ending. The big, catastrophe here is that Hina is the weather maiden, and if she remains on the earth, like, it's just going to keep raining and like deluging Tokyo, right, and flooding everything. And so she sacrifices herself to bring back the sunny days. And Horaka basically like goes up, gets her back, brings her back to Earth, and subjects Tokyo to rain for the next, 5 years, 3 years, whatever it was. And it was kind of interesting to like talk through a little bit with you, Jim, after the movie, that like selfish choice. Was it a selfish choice? Was it like them putting themselves before the world? Or was it restoring the region back to its natural order? And is that better or worse? Will, I'm very curious what your take on that was.
Yeah, well, I think that like you can sort of cast it both ways, and that's okay. I think that one of Shinkai's other things that he leans into, and I didn't mention this in the pre-spoiler section, is I think he likes the idea of seeing how environmental catastrophe impacts characters on a personal level, how they feel responsible for it, and how they respond to just that dramatic change in their environment. And here we have a set of characters who could have stopped it, but they didn't because of their love, their need to be together. Like they would rather sacrifice everyone for themselves. And I don't want to mention what it is, Brad, for fear of spoiling this thing for other people. But I think you and I recently talked about a video game that, where we had a very similar conversation. And all I could think about during this was, honestly, like, I wonder what Brad thought of this, knowing what he thought about that video game.
So yeah, I mean, it was interesting how, I guess, so the rain that was happening, even though it was portrayed as a anomalous situation, right? All this rain all at once, was kind of the natural state. And the thing she was doing with the sunshine was more of a fantastical, unnatural thing that she was doing. But every time she did it, right, she lost a little bit of herself.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
She disappeared a little bit more. And it was clear that if she was going to bring more sunshine, she was going to be no more, right? So he was fighting to get her back, to bring her back into the world and allow it to rain. And it's interesting because I guess this movie can eat its cake and have it too, right? Because it can have the emotional happy ending payoff that I think the movie is going for and its fans really want between, as far as the main love story, but it can also give a kind of a little bit of a veiled environmental message that, hey, this is the natural order of the world. Or is it global warming? Who knows? But I mean, I think at the end, it's kind of rationalized as, hey, this is 200 years ago, Tokyo was flooded, so it can be flooded now, which is kind of the same argument that non-global warming people use. It was kind of weird at the end for me.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, like, you can put the justification one way or the other, but the what is happening to Tokyo now is because of the action of these two, and it makes you think a lot more about, like, well, the things that we do have an impact on others, but at the same time, like, one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves is to protect ourselves and to protect our loved ones. And so you can sort of see both sides of that coin. And I don't watch this film with judgment for these characters, because I think regardless of what decision they made, I would have understood why they made it. And I think that's a testament to the setup and the writing that they got to that point with two very viable options. I think they did choose the most interesting one, and that's good. But I think they could have gone either way, and because they had set the foundation for it.
Right. And I like that they went in a kind of an unpredictable way, right? Because they could have gone in the path where she eventually disappears, but then somehow she reappears, maybe in another girl or something. I mean, we've seen this done different ways before, but I think the way this movie did it was a little bit different enough to make it very interesting.
Yeah, completely agree on every level. I mean, we could have had like a reincarnated Weather Maiden show up,
Right.
I'm kind of glad we didn't get that.
100% Sunshine Girl sounds better.
I agree. Well, this film was definitely a big slam dunk for the three of us. Sounds like we all loved it quite a bit. Having just come off of our top 10 films of 2019 show, Jim, what's the likelihood that Weathering with You could maybe end up on your top 10 films of 2020?
Ooh. Too early to tell, but I'll say at least as far as so far this year, it's definitely in the running.
Yeah, I think that it would struggle to make my top 10. I've got a few things that are sort of like those festival movies that you see, but then don't actually get released until 6 or 7 months later. I've got a couple of those that are higher ranked than this. They're all genre specific films, so they're not going to be for everyone. So I think this one is going to be one of those
cases.
I think that its cap for me is probably going to be where kind of Your Name was last year, which is sort of rounding out that 15 to 20 slot. I think is going to be it's probably most likely spot, which is a very good spot to be. Now, if next December is terribly disappointing, please look to me to revise that, because I'm slotting a bunch of those okay, there's going to be some things that we're not aware of yet, but it's good regardless of where it falls on the list. I had a good time with this.
Yeah.
And I love that Radwimps that that's Radwimps songs.
Indeed. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and give the rain a rest. We're going to bring the sun back and wrap the show up with some plugs. Since I know for a fact we have a couple of new listeners with us this week, just a reminder, plugs is where we put some things on your radar we think are fun or interesting or, great to see in terms of film, TV, whatever. Yes, it is that time. I hope you guys are ready. I'll kick things off. I actually didn't really have a plug coming into the show. I was like, well, I'll just pick a movie release that's coming out that I'm excited for. But then I had an opportunity to catch up with an SNL sketch that had me truly belly laughing. And it's not often SNL is able to do that for me. They a couple years ago, Adam Driver hosted SNL, and they did an Undercover Boss Kylo Ren edition, Matt the radar technician, and that was really funny. But they did a follow-up to that, and this time he's playing a different character, but it's still Undercover Boss, and kind of ties into some things with The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. But I'll tell you what, I am such a huge fan of Adam Driver. I mean, the sketch was super, super fun. If you didn't see SNL, you didn't get a chance to catch up with it yet, definitely worth checking out if you're a Star Wars fan. But I think I need to see more Adam Driver in comedic role movies. He's got some really good comedic timing that I wouldn't necessarily expect from him. So you guys have seen Adam in more things than I have, I think. But I loved him in these sketches. So much fun. So definitely catch up.
Yeah. I think the only comedy thing that I've actually seen him in was it Logan Lucky he was in? Where he played this kind of just deadpan one of the brothers or something like that in that movie. And it was kind of a weird switch up of roles for him at the time. But I think he's definitely got those chops in there. And I wouldn't mind seeing something like this from him every once in a while. The guy's great in just about everything he does. I mean, we loved Marriage Story this year. I did see The Report. He was good in that. I don't think the movie was very good, but he was really good in it. Marriage Story was fantastic. He was great in that. And then, of course, his role as Kylo Ren. I think he embodies that role, and I think he's awesome. I can't wait to see more of him doing stuff. Yeah.
Well, I think in terms of comedies, he doesn't play a lot of traditional comedic roles. Even when you think about Logan Lucky, that's technically a comedy, but I don't think of it as a let's go to the movies for some laughs type movie. He did the Dead Don't Die, which was a comedy. Yeah, he's done a few things like that, sort of in that range, but he's also done a lot of things like Marriage Story or Patterson or Silence, things that are very much not comedies. And I think that he hasn't really played in the comedy space that much.
Well, maybe we'll get to see him do more of these kinds of things. But Jim, I agree. It's one of those things we probably don't want to see too much, right? Because too much of a good thing is never a good thing. So, but yeah, SNL, Undercover Boss, Kylo Ren edition, part 2. Check it out. Jim, what have you got this week?
So I was doing some traveling this week, and when I travel, I always load up my devices with movies that I can watch on these boring-ass plane rides. This time, I saw that there's a movie coming out this year. I think it was actually released late last year, called Ip Man 4. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ip Man. It's IP Man or Ip Man. These are a series of Chinese-produced movies about a Chinese martial arts master called Ip Man, who was based on a real-life character, the actual teacher of Bruce Lee back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So I said, We saw a movie several years ago called The Grand Master. Will, I don't know if you saw it, but I know Brad and I saw it.
So good.
I didn't.
Oh man, it's so good. I am not a fan of martial arts movies, really. I just don't. It's not a genre that I dive deep into. But I saw The Grand Master, and it was such a great style and really well done and great story that I'm like, hey, maybe I should check this out. So I started watching with 2008's Ip Man. There's actually 3 Ip Man movies released, but when I looked in IMDb, there's like a whole series of Ip Man related movies. This guy was a legend basically in China and around the world for his martial arts. But what really works about the I've seen two and a half of these movies so far, and I'm still getting through the third one. The lead actor who plays Ip Man, his name is Donnie Yen, and he has such charisma. He plays this very quiet, introverted, kind of silent power kind of martial arts / Zen master, and he's really good. He's got a great face for cinema. I would recommend these movies are all available like on I think on Netflix right now. You can watch these, starting with the first one. It's really well done. It brings in elements of history, the war between China and Japan back in the 40s, 30s or 40s. I'm not exactly sure on that history. But yeah, check him out. Ip Man from 2008 with Donnie Yen. It's really good stuff. It's opening my eyes to a whole genre of cinema that I probably normally wouldn't gravitate to.
That's awesome, babe. Yeah, I mean, Grandmaster was so good, and I didn't know, I guess, that the Ip Man movies were related to the Grandmaster. So now I kind of want to go back and watch some of them because Grandmaster was so good. So maybe I'll check out the first one and see if we'll carry on from there. But,
Sure.
awesome plug. We also have a bunch of other Ip Man movies, it sounds like, to go through. So maybe I'll hop in with you.
We do.
And
we
and
do.
watch
And
one with you.
They're for me they're more interesting than some of the Marvel movies. I mean, it's like a whole universe that I didn't know existed. But instead of superheroes, you have this martial arts guy. So it's kind of like Iron Man instead of Ip Man.
I think we need an Ip Man / Zatoichi Saturday movie marathon this weekend, babe.
There you go. I'm down. Let's do it.
All right, I'm on board. Will, what have you got for your plug this week?
Oh man, I think the one that I want to talk about is I've got like bummers, and I've got bummers in front of me, and I'm like, I don't want to do a bummer, so I'll do this one instead. So I was going through some just different documentaries from the end of last year because there are several that were on my radar, and some of which will even be talking about next week with our show, that were just like ones that I wanted to get to and did get a chance to watch. And I had quite a good time with this one movie, and I found it on Hulu, and it's called Hail Satan, but with like a question mark at the end, like Hail Satan. And it's a documentary that is about the Satanic Temple, and most specifically, or kind of most famously, they tried to find places where like courthouses or city halls and stuff were erecting Ten Commandments, and then they would also lobby to erect like a statue of Baphomet there, just to sort of show that like, hey, if you're gonna, if a government entity is gonna put favoritism towards one religion, it should do it towards all. And it was really fascinating to watch because I had followed that news story because I think a lot of us were sort of like interested in it when it happened, but like, you didn't really like learn a lot about the people behind them, how this group formed, why they formed, kind of what their goals and motives are, and just how interestingly both subversive and not subversive they are as a group. It was a very fascinating watch, sort of a breezy watch at 95 minutes, and it's one of those documentaries that like, it's not like full of like gotcha moments, but it does like sort of unfold and reveal things as the movie goes along. So you're not spoiled on the premise in the first 10 minutes. There's always like a new discovery or new interesting thing to find. So it's called Hail Satan. And trust me, if you watch it, you're not going to be like suddenly like, like the lights aren't going to flicker, demons aren't going to come out and like pull you down. It's not that type of thing. This is just a film about a group of people who are working within their structure to sort of make sure that the government isn't trying to favor one group over another. And it's really interesting to watch it from their perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is one that's been hovering on that gotta watch documentary list for a while, and I've come across it a few times. I want to say this one screened maybe at South by last year. I'm not sure, but something tells me it may have. I'm not sure about that, but definitely one I want to catch up with. If you say it's worth
So,
watching, I hear it does subvert some
so wait,
things.
It's a breezy
this
watch.
this is
Yeah.
not the Satanist documentary that you watched a few months back. This is a different movie, Jim.
I didn't. Yeah, it's different. Didn't see this one.
Okay, I gotcha.
I don't remember the name of that one, but I did not see this one.
I gotcha. All right.
And it's on Hulu. So if you have that platform, you can just fire it up and watch it now.
You do.
All right. Excellent. Well, it's been a big stuffed show. In fact, it was a double stuffed show, given that we reviewed not one, but two movies. We have a great show coming up next week with our MBP Awards. Don't forget, follow that link in the live chat, in the show notes, on our Facebook page. We'd love to hear what your picks are for our annual MBP Awards. So be sure to send those in, and we'll, of course, share ours with you next week as well. Also, please be sure when you send them in, one of the questions is, who the hell are you? Let us know what name you want to go by. That way, if we read your picks online, we can refer to you. Some people don't like their last name revealed. Some people want like first name, location. However you want to fill that out, feel free. As we look to wrap up here, gentlemen, Jim, where can people find you online if they want to talk movies between now and next week?
Definitely find me on Twitter. My handle is at JJP. Those are my initials. At JJP Out West. You can find me there, and find me on Facebook under Jim Poliafco, my name.
All right. And Will, how about for you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Whatever Cove. I'm on Facebook. Just look for William Lindis. You can also find me on letterboxd.com, where I review and rank films. Just look for William Lindis there, and you'll find me.
All right. Excellent. And you can find me on Safe for Work Twitter at iBradPro, as well as on Facebook. Just search for Brad Harris. Definitely send a message, though, first. Sometimes blind friend requests, they can be bots. You never know. A message helps to let us know that you're real. So would love to chat. Feel free to say hi. We will see you all next week for our MBP Awards. Have a great week, great weekend, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.